Oh, hey, good day. Today's all about PIDs and sliders. No, not these sliders. These sliders. Because today we finish up our 3-inch Micro FPV Drone Tune by looking at the PIDs of our baseline tune and changing them if necessary using Betaflight 4.2 sliders to get better performance from our Micro FPV 3-inch quadcopter. This is the third video in our Micro FPV Drone Tuning Guide series. If you missed one of the first two, no worries, just check them out through the Micro FPV Quadcopter Tuning Guide playlist, linked below in this video's description. My goal in this Drone Tuning Guide series is to get the best performance out of your Micro FPV quadcopter in the shortest amount of time. The end result of this series will be a PID and filter tuning template or a preset for Micro FPV drones of various sizes based on things like thrust to weight ratio and types of props used. This drone tuning process I go through is included in this checklist, which you can download through a link in the video description below. I'm also making available the CLI PID and filter setting commands for each of the drones I'll be tuning. So, as you follow this series, I'm giving you two things. One is a preset for a variety of Micro FPV drones, which you can use simply by cutting and pasting the CLI PID and filter commands for a quad you have that's similar. And two, you're also getting the process I used to make these templates with the available Micro FPV Drone Tuning Guide. So you can adjust the templates if necessary to meet your flight performance needs. You should find one, if not both of these, useful in tuning your Micro FPV drone. If you've got a friend you think might like this series, please share this video with them so they too can continue their journey to better FPV fun. Hit that thumbs up button below and remember to subscribe to your TMac FPV channel, your home for your journey to better FPV fun, flights, and racing stuff. This is our starting point for today, and these are our baseline tune filter settings within our PID tuning tab. We've enabled the gyro RPM filters, and we've adjusted the dynamic notch filter parameters from the default values. Last time we determined that these filter settings did not result in hot motors, and they effectively reduced the noise in our gyro signal. These are our baseline tune PID settings, which we got to by moving this master multiplier slider from the default position left to the 0.8 position. Let me quickly go over the general flow of the process that we're using so that you'll have a better understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. We started with the Betaflight tuning notes, which is where you always want to start with when a new version release comes. They can be found on the Betaflight GitHub site at these URLs, usually just by inserting the version release number you're interested in here. In those tuning notes, it states the Betaflight default values are set up for medium high-performance quads, which they describe as responsive 5-inch and some smaller machines. The notes also speak of low-authority quads and high-authority quads, describing each as you see here. Quads are broken out into these three broad categories because the tunes for each category may be slightly different. For our Micro FPV 3-inch quad with a max thrust-to-weight ratio of 9.4, we're over here in the high-authority category. So in that high-authority category, the first thing we did was work on our filter settings. We enabled our RPM filters, which I will always do from this point on. There's no sense in not doing it since they're so darn effective. I've got a video on the RPM filters you can check out if you're unfamiliar with how to set those up. Next, since we enabled our RPM filters, we adjusted our dynamic notch filter from its default settings since those default settings are for without RPM filters set up. Then, as I just mentioned, we moved our master multiplier slider to the left to the 0.8 position, which is one of the two positions recommended in the notes for high authority quads. We then did a test flight to check the motor's temps, which turned out okay. In that test flight, we also visually looked through our FPV goggles display for any signs of bobbles, wobbles, prop wash, or oscillations, or if the quad just felt sloppy and sluggish. Everything seemed okay, and if at this point you're happy with the way your quad flies and don't want to spend any more time trying to improve its performance, you're done. If, however, you do visually observe some issues and/or you want to try to verify or improve your quad's performance, that's when we need to go to the next level and use our simple yet effective tool, Betaflight Blackbox Explorer. I went through the basics of how to use it in the last video, and we did use it to verify our filters were doing a great job of getting rid of noise in our gyro signal. So now we take our test flight data using our Blackbox log viewer to observe if our baseline PID settings are actually doing their job. Once again, if we're happy with what we see, we're done. If we see significant oscillations or excessive delay in the response of our quadcopter to our stick commands, then we'll need to continue to the next step. Here's where we'll adjust our PIDs and maybe our low-pass filter settings to get our quad to respond to our stick commands the way we want it to, while minimizing significant oscillations and response delay. Then we'll take it out for a test flight after we've made any changes and observe through our FPV goggles and/or Blackbox Explorer if we're satisfied with our quad's performance. If we are, then we're done. If we're not satisfied because one or more of these conditions does exist, we continue the cycle of making adjustments, performing a test flight, and observing our quad's performance until we are satisfied with it. That's the general flow of our process. Now let's take a look at how our baseline PIDs are doing their job. So we open up Blackbox Explorer, we grab our log file from our baseline PID settings test flight, and for demonstration purposes in this video, I'll also upload the flight video. So we click on Open Log File / Video, and I grab the video from there. Now to synchronize your log file with your video, I'll demonstrate how to do that just this once. Here you have this blue line where arming beep begins. So what I do to synchronize the video is I intentionally arm the quad in front of the quadcopter's camera so that I know visually when I arm the quad and can synchronize that event to this blue line. So you can do it that way, or you can find an event such as the beginning of a maneuver, a flip, or a roll, or something like that, and you go to your shortcut menu, and here it tells you to synchronize a log with a video. You press M to place a marker on the log where an event occurs, such as the exact start of a roll, or when you flip the arming switch. Then scroll backwards and forwards until your video shows the exact same start of that particular event, and click Alt-M, and then it's automatically going to synchronize the log and the video for you. So that's what I've done here. I've synchronized the video with my log file, and you don't need to load the video when you're doing Blackbox Explorer. I'm just doing it for the purposes of this video to demonstrate how to do it. It does provide you with additional visual information as to what your quadcopter is doing throughout the flight, as opposed to just looking at this particular 3D model of the quadcopter. So here you'll notice that our legend is blank. We're not seeing any of our Blackbox log graph traces up on the screen. So the question then is, what is it that we want to look at to determine if our current baseline PID settings are actually doing their job? Let me quickly go over what it is we want to look at and why before we actually get into the details of looking at our traces so that we're all starting from the same basic foundation. So what do we want to look at in our Blackbox flight log? Well, this is a basic PID controller diagram. We're over here with our transmitter moving our sticks to command our quadcopter over here to fly in a certain way. In Blackbox, our stick commands are known as set point, and our quadcopter's flight motion is described by its gyro on the 3 axes of roll, pitch, and yaw in terms of degrees per second. In reality, our quadcopter doesn't fly exactly perfectly how we command it to. Its actual motion is different. That difference between what we command it to do and what it actually does is called error. We obviously want to keep that to a minimum. We can do that by adjusting our 3 variables of P gain, I gain, and D gain. If we increase our P, it pushes the quadcopter to its desired commanded motion more quickly, but if we increase it too much, it's going to overshoot its target, causing it to bounce back to its intended position and could result in shuddering type movements. If we increase our D, it'll dampen or slow down the P term, reducing overshoot, as well as prop wash vibrations and that shuddering effect. However, too much D can result in hot motors. If we increase I, it's going to inhibit any consistent error our quadcopter may have between our commanded motion and its actual motion. Feed forward is another variable we have control over, which actually is like a P-term helper in that it works with the P-term in the same direction to get the quad to its commanded motion more quickly. Blackbox to me is sort of like OpenTX in that it has a lot of different things you can do with it, but you don't have to use all of its features. I like to keep things as simple as possible, so what makes sense for me to look at to begin with in our Blackbox flight log is what we're commanding our quad to do, or our set point, and what it's actually doing, or the gyro signals on all 3 axes. We could also take a look at the PID error, and if we needed to get into more detail, we could look at each individual P, I, and D terms for each of the 3 axes. However, in this video, we're not going to go that deep. We're just going to set up and look at our stick commands, or set point, and our quadcopter's actual motion, or gyro, on each axis. So we're going to look at our set point and gyro, and adjust our PIDs, if we need to get our quad's actual motion more closely matching its commanded position. If we're seeing high-frequency oscillations, bounce back, or that shudder I talked about earlier, we could do one of 2 things. We could either decrease our P gain or increase our D. If we're seeing prop wash vibrations by themselves, or if they also happen and we also have some overshoot, we could try increasing our D gain to see if it takes care of both of those conditions. If we're seeing the same consistent error between our set point and gyro, we might want to try increasing our eye gain. And if we want our quad to feel more responsive to our stick inputs during quick maneuvers like flips and rolls, we can try increasing our feed forward. Okay, now we know what we're going to look at and what we can change if necessary to get our quad's actual movements to more closely match our commands, which will increase its performance. So let's take a look at our flight log. Okay, I've set up our graph to show our stick commands in red and our actual quadcopter motion in yellow on the roll, pitch, and yaw axes. Here's how we're going to do this. On this test flight, I've done a couple quick 180-degree turns to see if we get any prop wash vibrations. I've also done a flip and 2 rolls, one to the left and one to the right. For each of these maneuvers, to give you an idea of how easy or difficult it is to see oscillations and vibrations visually through your goggles. Oh, and this isn't goggle DVR footage. It's HD from a Caddx Tarsier. After I've played it through at half speed, then I'll scroll through the maneuver to check for any overshoot, oscillations, or delay. If we find any for each maneuver, I'll let you know what I think we should do about them, if anything. Then I'll make any necessary changes in Betaflight and take her out for another test flight to see if we made any progress. These first 2 maneuvers are quick 180-degree turns. I'll play it through at full speed and then half speed. Okay, now at half speed. So now let's scroll through the maneuver and see if we got any oscillations or vibrations through these quick 180-degree turns. And here we're about halfway through the maneuver. Let's go ahead and take a look at the roll axis. And up here, we see a little bit of prop wash vibrations on the roll axis. Some also on the pitch, not too bad. And the yaw actually looks pretty good. Let's go to the next 180-degree turn. That looks pretty good actually on the roll, pitch, and yaw. So from those 2 180-degree turns, we saw a little bit of prop wash vibrations, not too bad, but we might be able to get rid of those by increasing D. Let's go to our next maneuver, which is a flip. And we'll play this through at full speed and at half speed. Then at half speed. All right, now let's scroll through it and see what we've got. Got a little bit of oscillations on the roll axis. You can see here. We've got some overshoot here on the pitch axis. Keep in mind, this is our stick commands in red and our quadcopter movement through the gyro in yellow on the pitch axis. So you can see our actual movement overshot the commanded position and had to come back. And then we've got a little bit of oscillation, not too much, not too bad. So from both of those on the roll and pitch axes, where we've got a bit of oscillations and some overshoot, we go back to that chart that I showed earlier, and we could either lower our P or increase our D to try and compensate for that. But you see here we've also got some delay. So we can take a look at this delay by hitting the M key, and it puts a marker right there. And since this is our commanded stick position, we can go over here and see that this is at minus 226 degrees per second. So if we scroll over to our actual movement and get the yellow line at approximately minus 226, which is right there, we can see that we've got a 20 millisecond delay between our commanded stick movement and the quadcopter responding appropriately. So if we've got the option to take care of, on the roll and pitch axes, the oscillations and the overshoot by decreasing P or increasing D, because of this delay, I would prefer increasing D, because if we decrease P, this delay would probably actually get bigger. So at this point, I'm leaning towards increasing D. On the yaw axis, everything looks pretty good. Okay, let's go to our first roll, which is a roll to the left. I'll play it through at 100% speed, and then at 50%. And then we'll scroll through it. Okay, taking a look at the roll axis, since it is a roll to the left, you see we've got delay again. Actually not much overshoot. This is actually just shifted to the right. And I'm not seeing hardly any oscillations. It's just a delay. So let's take a look at how much this delay is. We'll mark it here, and minus 189. So we go over here to approximately minus 189, and we see we've got a 15-second delay. We can see if we can reduce that. One avenue to potentially reduce that without increasing P is to increase our feed forward. So that's another option we have to potentially reduce this delay. Since we've already seen some oscillations with previous traces, I don't want to increase P. I'm inclined to increase D, and to get rid of some of this delay, we can increase feed forward, which would help in these types of quick maneuvers of flips and rolls to get our actual quadcopter movement boosted down earlier and potentially reduce some of this delay. So that's my thought process on this right now. Let's check out the pitch axis, and here you see a little bit of oscillations. Once again, increasing D should help that. The oscillations aren't that bad. They're not going up and down for a long, extended period of time. And this is tracking fairly well. There's just a very small amount of delay here. It actually looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next roll, which is to the right. Play it at full speed. And then half speed. And then we'll scroll through it. This is the roll to the right, and we've got a little bit of overshoot. Not too bad, though. And what we're primarily seeing is delay. We don't have much oscillation. A little bit, maybe. A little bit of overshoot. So once again, I'm inclined to crank up some feed forward here. See if that works at all. Pitch, tracking pretty good. And yaw, mainly delay. All right, so I think based on everything we've seen, at this point, I'm not going to increase P. I'm going to increase D, and I'm going to increase my feed forward. Based on this chart we saw earlier, we did see some oscillations, so we had the choice of decreasing P or increasing D. We also saw some delay, which feed forward should be able to help out with that. And if we decrease P, that actually might add more delay. So I'm looking at increasing D, which would also help out with that little bit of prop wash vibrations that we had, as well as increasing feed forward. So let's go ahead and make those changes, take her out for another test flight, and see if we've made any progress. All right, so we're going to increase our D and also our feed forward values. To increase our D, we go to the PD balance slider. Remember from last video, we've got D min disabled. So we're only changing this one D value. So I'm going to bump this up 5, and that means moving the slider over 2 notches. Like that. With regards to feed forward, I'm going to bump this up a couple notches, close to 100, and see what happens there, because we're trying to reduce or minimize that delay which we saw earlier. Now, whenever you make any changes, you'll want to do a short 30-second flight and then check your motor temps. Make sure they're not too hot. If they're okay, that's when I go ahead and do my full flight with quick 180 turns, flips, rolls, things of that nature. So always make sure to check your motor temps after you make any changes. Remember also, we haven't touched our filter settings, which could also reduce some delay if we move these over to the right. Since I'm bumping up D right now, I'm just going to leave these low-pass filter settings at their default values. We want to go ahead and click Save and take her out for another test flight. And we'll come back in, take a look at the flight log, and see if we made any progress. All right, we increased our D gain to get rid of some of those oscillations, a little bit of overshoot, and prop wash vibrations we saw. We also increased our feed forward in an attempt to reduce some of that delay, and we kept those gyro and D-term low-pass filters in their default positions. I conducted the same sort of test flight I did with a baseline tune with a couple quick 180-degree turns to bring out any prop wash vibrations, a flip, and a couple rolls. The best and quickest way I could think of to show you how our refined tune compared with our baseline tune was to do a side-by-side comparison of their flight log traces at almost the identical places in those maneuvers I just mentioned. So the first maneuver we're looking at is that quick 180-degree prop wash inducing turn on the roll axis. On the left, we have our baseline tune with the PIDs as shown here. And on the right, we have our tune with increased D and feed forward with those PIDs shown down here. Here you can see that at about the same point in the turn as indicated by the quadcopter's position to the flag, the sticks display, and the actual traces, it looks as if our D term on the right has actually dampened out some of the prop wash vibrations we see over here on the left. In fact, it may not look like a lot on the screen, but I can tell you, I did feel a big difference between the two. In our baseline tune, I could both see and hear the prop wash to some degree, whereas in our new tune, it was almost non-existent. So by increasing our D term to reduce those prop wash vibrations, I'd call this a win. For our next maneuver, the flip over the house, we're looking at the pitch axis, which makes sense to look at for a flip. Once again, we're at essentially the same position in the flip. Here we want to look at if our increased D term reduced some of the overshoot we saw earlier, and if our increased feed forward reduced some of that delay we saw. First, let's look for overshoots. On the left, we have a fairly large one at the bottom, and a nice little peak over here. Compared with our new tune on the right, which is significantly reduced here, and almost no overshoot here. It's more of a delay. It's just shifted to the right. Speaking of delay, let's now look at how our increased feed forward dealt with reducing that, if at all. On the left, I've marked out the largest amount of delay at the beginning of our flip maneuver between our commanded stick position and the actual movement of the quad. It's got a 32 millisecond delay. Whereas over here on our new tune, the largest delay at the same point in our flip was 27 milliseconds, which is a 16% reduction in delay. As you can see, as we progressed through the maneuver, it appears the delay got even narrower on our new tune than with our baseline tune. So for our flip, I'd say the increase in both our D and feed forward terms had our desired effects of reducing both overshoot and delay. Let's look at our roll maneuver. Here you can see we have very similar positive results. Our overshoot over here on the left has been virtually wiped out over here on the right. What's more is our actual quadcopter movement more closely tracks the commanded stick position with our new tune than it did with our baseline tune over here on the left. What about delay? Well, the largest delay at the beginning of our maneuver with our baseline tune is 37 milliseconds, and on the right it's been reduced to 25 milliseconds. That's a 33% reduction in delay. I'm going to call this a win as well. Not bad for a 2-pack TMac tune. Now, if we wanted to, we could continue that iterative cycle we saw earlier, continuing to refine our tune to possibly reduce that delay further by perhaps reducing our low-pass filters as just one example, and even increasing our feed forward some more. It's really up to you as to what you consider your perfect tune. For me, I'm good with this tune for now. So that's the tune for our Micro FPV 3-inch quad with a max thrust-to-weight ratio of 9.4 on a 4S LiPo. If you've got a similar quad and liked its tune, the CLI commands for both its PIDs and filter settings are available below, as is the complete tuning guide for Micro FPV quadcopters that walks you through this FPV tuning process. I'll do another Micro FPV tune for a different type quad for the next video in this series. If you've got one in particular you'd like to see, make sure to let me know in the comment section below. Remember to check these out next for more good stuff to speed you on your journey to better FPV fun. Thanks for your time. I'll see you next video. Clear skies, friend.